Today, we're going to dig into something fascinating: the hidden psychological currents that are constantly guiding our actions, our choices, and even what we believe.
So think about it. The last choice you made, big or small, what you decided to wear this morning, a comment you typed out online, you probably felt like you were in complete control, right? In the driver's seat. But what if I told you there are these powerful, invisible forces that are always at play, shaping that choice without you even realizing?
Yeah, there's a whole field of science, social psychology, that has spent decades designing these brilliant experiments to figure out just how much the people around us, even the people we just imagine are around us, are influencing what we do. So let's dive into some of the most classic, most revealing studies ever done. All right, first up. This is probably the one social force we all deal with every single day. That simple but incredibly powerful pressure to just fit in. I mean, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? Of course not. You trust your own senses. But back in 1951, a psychologist named Solomon Asch decided to put that exact question to the test. And the results were, well, they were eye-opening. The setup was just brilliant in its simplicity. So you're the volunteer, and you're sitting in a room with a bunch of other people you think are also volunteers. You get shown two cards. One has a single line. The other has 3 lines of different lengths. All you have to do is say which of the 3 lines matches the first one. It's an easy question. The answer is totally obvious. But then, one by one, everyone else in the room, and they're all actors, by the way, they all confidently give the same completely wrong answer. And you're last to answer. So what do you? An absolutely staggering 75% of the real participants went along with the group's wrong answer at least one time. They knew it was wrong. You could see the conflict on their faces, but that social pressure to just go with the flow was too much to resist. And this experiment gave us this crystal clear picture of what psychologists call conformity. See, sometimes it's what they call normative influence. You just want to be liked. You don't want to rock the boat. But other times, it's informational influence. You start to doubt yourself, thinking, wow, maybe they all know something I don't. Either way, it really makes you think, right? When does our need to fit in start to overpower our responsibility to say what we know is true? Okay, so let's move on, because the stakes get a whole lot higher when it's not just about fitting in with a group of your peers, but about taking orders from someone you see as an authority figure. Now, we all like to believe we're good people. We have a moral compass, a line we would never cross. But in the early 1960s, a researcher named Stanley Milgram designed an experiment to see just how easily that compass could be pushed off course by authority. And the results? They were truly chilling. So participants were told they were teachers in a memory study. Their job was to give an electric shock to a learner in another room every time the learner got an answer wrong. And with each wrong answer, the voltage went up. Now, the learner was just an actor, of course. He'd scream, complain about a heart condition, and eventually just go silent. But every time the real participant would hesitate, this experimenter in a white lab coat would just calmly say that he was responsible for what happened and that the experiment had to continue. And look, these participants weren't monsters. They were under incredible stress. They were sweating, they were trembling, they were begging to stop. They were clearly caught in this terrible conflict between their own conscience and the commands of this authority figure. So, did they stop? This is the really shocking part. In the most famous version of this study, 65% of these regular, everyday people continued to give what they thought were painful, even dangerous electric shocks, all the way to the maximum voltage. It seemed like having that authority figure say, "I'm responsible," was enough to let them off the hook in their own minds. So, we've seen the power of the group and the power of authority. But what about the power of the situation itself? What happens when you put perfectly good people into a really bad place? And this brings us to one of the most famous and frankly infamous studies of all time, the Stanford Prison Experiment. A psychologist named Philip Zimbardo set up a fake prison in the basement of a university building. He took a group of psychologically healthy college students and randomly made half of them prisoners and half of them guards. The whole thing was supposed to last 2 weeks. It didn't even last one. Now, this experiment has become super controversial. For decades, the big takeaway was that the situation was so powerful it could turn good people cruel. But here's the thing. Many psychologists now argue that the way Zimbardo himself coached the guards had a huge impact on the outcome. Plus, a major attempt to replicate the study back in 2002 got completely different results. So it's a really powerful story, but as a piece of science, it's definitely one that's heavily debated today. Okay, so up to now, we've been looking at things people do, but what about the things they don't do?
Social psychology also gives us this amazing lens to understand why people sometimes fail to act, especially in an emergency.
A lot of the research into this started because of a really tragic event. Now, we know today that the initial reports were exaggerated, but the story that dozens of people heard a woman's cries for help and did nothing, that story made psychologists ask a really important question. Why? What is it about being in a crowd that can make us less likely to help someone? And they found a couple of key reasons. The first one is called diffusion of responsibility. It's that little voice in your head that says, "Oh, I'm sure someone else will call for help. It's not totally on me." The more people that are around, the less responsible any single one of us feels. Our personal sense of accountability just kind of evaporates into the crowd. And the second reason is something called pluralistic ignorance. This is fascinating. In a confusing situation, what do? We look around to see how other people are reacting. If nobody else is panicking, we figure, okay, I guess it's not a real emergency. But here's the crazy part. Everyone else is looking at you and thinking the exact same thing. The result? A whole crowd of people frozen in place because everyone is waiting for someone else to act first. So wow, we've seen how conformity and obedience and just being in a crowd can completely chip away at our personal sense of responsibility. And this isn't just some stuff from old textbooks. This happens every day in work meetings, on social media, pretty much everywhere. So the big question is, how do we get that accountability back? Well, the solution, the antidote, is actually surprisingly simple. It all comes down to individual accountability. Think about it. When you assign one specific person the public responsibility for making a decision, or even just for giving their input, the whole dynamic changes. Suddenly, they're much less likely to just go along with a bad idea, and they can't hide in the crowd as a passive bystander anymore. That little spotlight of clear responsibility forces us to trust our own judgment again.
So, the pressure to conform, the pull of authority, the safety of being in a crowd, these things are always there. Just knowing about them doesn't make them go away. But it does give you a choice. So the next time you have to make a decision, just ask yourself, am I really thinking for myself right now, or am I just letting the group decide for me?